Hey everyone. Today I thought I'd try something new and have a sort of discussion around a certain socionics famous figure, and this would be George Orwell, the author of 1984 and of Animal Farm, as well as other novels. And here to discuss George Orwell with me is Micah. How are you doing?
Hi. Hey. So I think we're gonna have a debate, but we decided that a discussion would probably be better.
Yeah, exactly. So I realized that I've been very busy today, and I just didn't have enough time just to research everything on George Orwell prior to the debate. And I thought to myself, maybe rather than just do a half-assed attempt at research, instead of having that sort of debate where I haven't got it already in my head, let's just watch the documentary. Let's get the whole audience on the same page in terms of the data we're looking at, and then we can discuss it later, like in the video.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. Because like even with like the debate, like kind of my thought was obviously I was fine with doing it because I agreed to, but like I also know that I feel like your knowledge of socionics is so much better than mine. So like I think
Oh, thank you.
I think a discussion would be like useful to kind of just analyze Orwell and try to come up with like the most accurate typing we can, or
Yeah.
like the dream is that we both agree that he's an SEI. I think
That would be a dream.
I think just like completely like we both watch this and then just like okay, completely everyone's wrong.
Well, you never know. Maybe we will. Let's see if I can. Let's see, make the screen bigger. Is it now full screen for everyone? No. Hang on. Oh no, it does go full screen. Okay, so let's play it and see what happens. Yeah.
For many people, it's hard to have a discussion about language, power, or politics without mentioning George Orwell. He was born in India, but raised in England. In the 1940s, he produced two of what many people think are the greatest novels of the 20th century, Animal Farm and 1984. And he died of tuberculosis, aged 46. Despite Orwell's request that there should be no biography, there have been countless attempts to pin down this most elusive of writers. 100 years after his birth, we commissioned his latest biographer, D.J. Taylor, to look for the real George Orwell.
This is one man's alarmed vision of the future. A future which he felt might, with such dangerous ease, be brought about.
It's interesting. He has this sense of foresight in his writing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I might have read somewhere that some of 1984 was him criticizing, like America, like what, based on his own experiences, what he thought was like the natural conclusion.
Yeah.
Where we're going.
So I don't know. Let's skip through this bit. Let's get to the content. Oh no, it's already there. Yeah, fine.
George Orwell is one of those writers, there are perhaps two or three in any century, who managed to colonize the popular consciousness of their time. Like Dickens and Shakespeare, the phrases he contributed to the language are known to millions of people who've never read a line of his books. Big Brother is watching you, Rule 101. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Well, that's interesting. Shakespeare and Dickens, IEE.
Well, a piece of moral litmus paper.
Yeah, he wrote a essay about Charles Dickens. I haven't read it in a while, but it was interesting.
It was curious how many people asked the same question. What would George have thought? But just as important is the question of how George thought. And this is a journey into the heart of Orwell's imagination.
What I've most wanted to do is to make political writing into an art. My starting point is always a feeling of partisanship, a sense of injustice. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I'm going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention, and my initial concern is to get a hearing.
All of Orwell's admirers from time to time indulge in the hopeless task of wondering what he might have thought or how he might have written about contemporary issues. It's very tempting. We can't know. His strength was that he had no party line, only that searing eye for cant, for phoniness, for bogus arguments. And we can't know what Orwell might have said about the war, because he wasn't a pacifist. Freeing the Iraqis from Saddam's oppression might have been his option. Who knows? I happen to think that it almost certainly would not have been, not in this case.
Orwell has always appealed to people on the right, because although he defined himself as a man of the left, he spent most of his life criticizing people on the left. But at the same time, because he identified himself as a man of the left also claims him.
If you're a political writer and you feel jaded or uninspired, the thing to do is sit down, perfect cure, and read some Orwell. And he'll remind you why you got into this in the first place. He inspired us to think that political writing was something worth doing, and thank you very much.
Whatever the political arguments about Orwell, one thing is for certain. His name was actually Eric Arthur Blair. Even this change of name says something about the myths he created around himself. And one of the tantalizing things for the biographer is his sheer elusiveness. The real Orwell is simply very hard to track down.
This is interesting. He's elusive. He doesn't follow a party line.
The Soviet archive, presumably somewhere there in the old
sticks in the public imagination, like Shakespeare and Dickens.
Took from him in Spain in 1937.
I'm sure they
He's always seemed to me to be like someone who's
sure it exists.
very much fighting for the people in his mind, at least, whether you agree with his politics or not. Like he's supporting the lower class, and he identified himself as a socialist, but at the same time he criticized a lot of the socialists of his day for not doing enough. But he's at the same time he's an intellectual. He doesn't. He's almost set apart from it, whether he wants to or not. That's just the vibe I always got from him.
Through Caversham and the BBC archives and but you never, as far as we know, there is no extant recording of his voice. Did you ever get on the trail of that?
He did quite a few recordings for programs, but none has ever turned up with his voice. So
we live in hope that
that this cracked voice will appear.
So how do we discover what he sounded like, how he behaved? As Orwell famously remarked in 1984, if there's hope, it lies in the proles. But Orwell wasn't a prole. He was the son of an upper-middle-class civil servant, steeped in the traditions of empire and duty, and his occasional attempts to disguise himself nearly always came to grief.
I always thought, in the rather brief time I knew him, though I saw a certain amount of him before I actually ever spoke to him, he was, I thought, a rather forbidding character. He would never say, let's go and have a drink, always have a pint, which he seemed to think having a pint was sort of good working class vernacular, which I dare say it was. But at one time, I was in a pub in Fleet Street, and he said, if you talk in that sort of voice, he very much disliked my voice, no doubt with good reason, and wear that sort of tie, you'll never get yourself accepted as working class. Now, this absolutely outraged me, because I didn't want to be accepted as any class. I was me, and that was that. But what irritated him was that the barman continually addressed him as sir and always called me Peter. That was the sort of thing which Orwell disliked.
A pint of wallop.
You know, Jim?
In a pro sector, we don't get it here.
So that's already very interesting, that he's sort of rejecting his upper class origins, well, upper middle class origins, and very much wants to be accepted as someone who is working class or a different class to where he was born.
Yeah, no, I think he generally wanted to be part of this abstract idea of the people. That's kind of what I get. Like, he didn't want to be almost like he didn't want to be considered elitist. I don't know. It's interesting though.
He didn't. Sorry, I didn't hear that, Micah. What did you say?
Where did I leave off? Like, what was the last thing you heard?
Sorry, yeah, he didn't want. You said he wanted to be of the people.
Like part, like he belonged to the group of people, like people as like an abstract idea, like not like literally, but like this idea that of almost not being elitist. At least that's almost, but not like he was fighting the very idea of like elitism. Like, you know what I mean? Like the idea that I'm in a better class.
Yes. Now the question is is this fact he wanted to re-identify himself as a man of like a popularis, as it were, or was it that he just wanted to reject this idea that you belong to certain classes and he wanted just to connect with anyone?
I think I would go with the second. I think he was very ideological. That's what stands out to me. And but he wasn't partisan, and I think they kind of mentioned that. But I think like and that's why he would criticize his own side so much, because he was focused more on making sure like the ideology was right, and then more of like kind of enforcing everyone else to follow in line. If that's kind of what I think. Sorry, what?
Was his ideology in that?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Sorry, what was his ideology in that?
I think a very left, like on a broad scale, I guess a very leftist kind of ideal. I almost want to say socialist, and by ideal I just mean like almost like in its purest form. And he was very. I felt like he was very strict on following those ideals, which is why like back with like the Soviet Union, of course, nowadays you have a lot more people saying like that's not real socialism, but it was kind of like they're saying they're on our side. So you have a lot of people back then who are more willing to say, yeah, no, it's a great place. Where he even back then was saying, no, look at all this evil things they're doing. This can't be socialism. Now, you can say that you can disagree with the argument, but I think it says a lot about who he was. That he wants to. He has this idea in his head of like this ideology, philosophy. I don't know, but like he wants it to be. He wants to stick to it, like very. I don't know, strictly is the right word, but I kind of want to say strictly, as he he doesn't like someone. He's very much against hypocrites, is what I kind of get.
Okay, that makes some sense. I mean, I think that well, I should say to people watching. So now, historically, George Orwell has been typed IEE by Rick DeLong typed in IEE. Peter Bartle typed him IEE, and that was how we benchmarked him. And I know Micah thinks LSI currently. Now, I think probably IE currently, but it'll be interesting to see how our opinions change over time. What I would say is that from what I've seen so far, I think that could either be this idea that I'm going to be working class and identifying with the working class. Or it could be, I don't want to be limited by my class and I want to be able to connect with anyone. So I want to appear more working class to working class people, not be treated like a denizen of some other class.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what else there is. There's a few other things to think about. So that he did have the same sort of popular appeal in his writing that Shakespeare and Charles Dickens had, both of them extroverted ethics leading. Now, I wouldn't read too much into that, but it is interesting to note.
Yeah, I also think that, like, when you're talking about English writers and you're going to compare one to, like, more famous ones, those are probably the ones you go to, just in general. Do you think he was slightly critical of Dickens, from what I remember, about exaggerating a little bit, specifically with like the French Revolution, French Revolutionary War, and like the with The Tale of Two Cities, which I think was just Dickens' style. I think if you read a Dickens book, the world is almost exaggerated.
Yeah,
but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. Now that would that be? I would say that's probably more extroverted logic valuing rather than extroverted ethics valuing. But I mean, would an LSI extroverted ethics leading type for exaggerating, for bringing things into greater clarity through their exaggeration? I'm not so sure.
I don't really know, to be honest.
Yeah.
I can see your point, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's continue with part 2 of this documentary.
Orwell practiced these deceits throughout his adult life. The tramps and hop figures that he met on the excursions that produced his first book, Down and Out in Paris and London, knew him instantly for what he was, a toff, trying to pass himself off as a pauper.
As soon as we were inside the spike and had been lined up for the search, the tramp major called my name. "So you're a journalist?" "Yes, sir," I said, quaking. A few questions would betray the fact that I had been lying, which might mean prison. But the tramp major only looked me up and down and said, "Then you are a gentleman?" "I suppose so." He gave me another long look. "Well, that's bloody bad luck, Governor," he said. "Bloody bad luck, that is."
The most pervasive of the myths that he fashioned around himself was the notion that at bottom he was a failure. Orwell was sent aged 8 to St Cyprian's, a fashionable prep school on the Sussex coast. There he covered himself in academic glory and in 1916 won a scholarship to Eton. But as an adult, Orwell painted a very different picture of himself at this time.
Failure, failure, failure. Failure behind me, failure ahead of me. That was by far the deepest conviction that I carried away.
I don't think that Orwell exactly thought of himself as a failure. I think he was very skeptical of the available forms of success that he inherited. And I think Orwell was so determined not to identify himself with any kind of triumphalism that he, as it were, erred on the side of a mythology of failure. But I don't think it's exactly failure. I think it's a guilt about a personal and family history.
As a writer, Orwell was careful to create images of himself that portrayed him as an enemy of privilege. He described his time at Eton as 5 years in a lukewarm bath of snobbery. But his friends there thought he'd enjoyed himself, and his adult diaries are full of references to the annual Eton-Harrow cricket match. my researchers, I've never found any film footage of Orwell. This is footage of the 1921 Eton War game. We know that Orwell took part. We know that he scored a goal. He has to be here somewhere. But I've been through this countless times, and I've never been able to find him. There was more myth creation over Orwell's initial choice of career. In 1922, at the age of 19, he set sail from Liverpool for Rangoon and a job in the Burma department of the Indian Imperial Police. According to the Orwell legend, this consisted of 5 years of uncongenial exile, which he spent ground down by the weight of British imperialism. And yet serving in the East was a family tradition. When he came back to England in 1927, it wasn't to make a moral point, but with a medical certificate. He caught dengue fever. It was only later that Orwell's feelings about British rule in the East began to calcify into hard ideological commitment.
I was in the Indian police 5 years, and by the end of that time, I hated the imperialism I was serving with a bitterness which I probably cannot make clear. In the free air of England, that kind of thing is not fully intelligible. In order to hate imperialism, you've got to be part of it.
He was not very popular in the club, especially with the old and established Raj people. And then one day a message came in to say that an elephant was on the loose. When Orwell saw it, he realized it didn't need to be killed. It had already got over its fever, anger, lust, whatever it was. But by then he was surrounded by all these Burmese villagers, very anxious that he should kill this elephant. He shoots the elephant dies rather slowly and painfully. And his bosses were furious because it belonged to one of the wealthy companies, and it was a company elephant, and therefore should not have been shot.
I think that Orwell was trying to work out, if you like, what was underneath the kind of life history he lived in his family. Now, clearly, Orwell was born into a classic English regime of a sort of dying imperialism. And I think his work is dedicated to finding out what it was like to be the victim of the regime.
So it's interesting this. It's a very, it seems to be, again, very reactionary to his class upbringing and a strong desire to appear to others as if he's not from that upbringing.
Yeah, something that stood out to me about that, and I agree, is that on one hand, he seems to be able to craft a pretty good image, whether you agree with, believe it or not, and I think there's probably a mixture of truth and lies or exaggerations about who he was, and kind of push back so people don't see as much like the privileged family he came from, and just place in society.
Yes.
But I found it interesting is it seemed like in person he couldn't pull it off as much. Like when people see him, just the way he, at least it came, what it sounded like was that when people see him, just the way he presented himself and looked and acted, you immediately saw that he didn't belong to like this lower class.
Yes, but almost he could do it from a distance, but he couldn't convince people up close that he was working class.
Exactly.
Now, this suggests to me that extroverted ethics was in a quite prime position for him, but at the same time, perhaps not with extroverted sensation, and that he was able to create this sort of image from a distance, but not up close so well.
You think the extroverted extroverted sensation would have to do with like doing it close?
More so, yes. I think when you are making an impact in the moment and how you're acting right there, right then, that's something quite different to the image you're conveying over time and to other people who may be far away from you, and the long-term outcomes of how you're perceived. At least we can see sort of the opposite, actually. We'll say SEIs or ESIs in a room. They think about what's going on immediately around them, and they don't necessarily think about how it's going to be perceived elsewhere, say people watching on camera many miles away. So it does seem to me unusual, at least for... Okay, there are two things of this. One, they are talking about him in terms of an ideological bent, which seems perhaps unusual for an IEE. At the same time, they're talking about him as having a fixation on how he is perceived and trying to create maybe a persona or a way of being that is perceived differently to how he actually is, which strikes me as being unusual for an LSI.
No, I agree. I was thinking the same thing while watching it.
Yes. So let's persist. Well, let's see what comments are being made, actually. That might be worth looking at very quickly. What people say? Oh, Vlad wants to be part. Yeah, sure, Vlad. We'll have you on one day. That's fine. Some low S there. Yeah, I agree also. The fact that he was willing to sort of the impracticality of it, of going off and living as a down and out.
Yeah, I remember you said. Well, didn't you? I remember you saying a while ago that was the reason why you couldn't see EII, something like that.
Yeah, it is. If you think about it, it's a very low introverted sensation thing to do. That to take on this new experience as a tramp, you go and you live. And he was a journalist as well, so he was trying to investigate new experiences. And you
Right.
go and you live out on the streets to get a feel for what it's like to be that sort of person. Him coming from.
Couldn't it also be unvalued?
Sorry?
Introverted. I said, couldn't that also be unvalued introverted sensing?
It still is unusual for demonstrative introverted sensation, say for another
Okay.
side. I mean, an EIE, I could see them perhaps doing it if they wanted to identify the image of being a tramp, which I think so far that could be consistent. But I think also an IEE could do it. Say if the experience, if we're trying to get into someone else's head and do it that way, and of course forgetting about the introverted sensation needs. I don't think, of course, I can't imagine an SEI doing it. I think we managed to rule that SEI quite early.
I know.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be very unusual. I could see an IE doing it. I could see an ILE. I could see an EIE doing it. LIE, probably less likely. But yeah. So yeah, let's continue watching and see where we go from there. But let's just look at a few more comments. Anything else people are saying? Popo sort of says, I think LSIs can have some level of image consciousness. Yeah, they can be image conscious, but you're right, as Kat says, they're not very good at conveying the image they want to usually. And maybe something said about him not conveying the image well in person, but he seems to be doing it very well at long distance, which seems unusual for an LSI.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know I'm arguing against my own side, so to speak. But I think if you were only talking about him in person, I think that works. But at least based off this video, it seems like at a distance he was quite good at crafting an image and getting people almost to think of him. Like a lot of the ideas of George Orwell, like he I feel like, especially based off this video, he created himself, and it was kind of a mixture of truth and his own fiction.
Yes.
And we still have this idea of him that matches pretty closely to that today, which to me says it was a success.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also lends itself to the earlier point about him being as iconic as, say, a Dickens or Shakespeare, that he was able to successfully anchor himself in the public imagination more than other writers, other authors, through some of his words, his turns of phrase. So, yeah, I would say that at the moment I think most people are saying now, IEE versus EIE seem to be high. At the moment, I'm still not sure. I imagine you're leaning more EIE, Micah. Would I be right in saying that?
I don't know, to be honest, because well, as much, because beta makes a certain amount of sense to me, obviously, but the thing about EIE is it would imply an extroverted feeling lead, which I have trouble seeing before.
Yeah. The odd thing is, although that guy's kind of almost being ideological in his antipathy towards imperialism, having experienced it, at the same time, that's not really what he wrote about. And he spent most of his time criticizing the other side. Criticizing his own side, not the other side, which is also unusual, slightly contrarian, you could say, more so than one would imagine from someone who is, ideological and sees one side as being good, the other side as being bad, or at least wants to support their own team.
Yeah, I mean, I think out of the two, if we were going to stop right now and say George Orwell was either IEE or EIE, I mean, he's a delta intuitive, I would say, out of those two options.
Yeah, because there's that not really belonging to any sort of team. Also, in general, this idea of seeing himself as failure, even though he actually had a pretty good time and enjoyed himself, that even during that period, he was trying to tell everyone, no, actually, I saw myself as failing, even though I was doing well. And that is interesting, because that's before the anti-imperialism set in. It was like a general disquiet about himself in a situation. It suggests a certain degree of reflectiveness and a certain degree of searching how the externalities of his lifestyle did not match his internalities, and focusing on the internalities against the if that makes any sense whatsoever.
No, I think I get what you mean, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, Kat said, I didn't mean to suggest EIE. I meant to suggest he's not E plus F valuing. Oh, okay, fair enough. And yeah, I do find it difficult to see extrovert sensation valuing. I do see that as a difficulty. I can't see anything that is extrovert sensation valuing so far. Yeah, that is true. Like mobilizing, so F6, I can't see happening.
F6, no, for sure. It's not F6.
And that's why I think EIE is less likely. But let's keep watching. Let's see, because if he is an IEE, it does seem unusual. So let's continue.
Getting onto Orwell's scent in these early years is almost impossible. Not a single letter home survives from his 5 years in Burma. But there's a faint chance that he could be here in this cine film. Stop. I can't be sure, but I think that's Richard Blair, Orwell's father, taken in late 1928, the beating of the Southwold bounds. And it may be possible that somewhere in this footage we can find his son.
He didn't get, I think, any support at all from his father. He found it very hard to impress his father with what he was doing. And I think deep down, as most of us would feel, we would like that kind of approval. And I don't think he really got it.
We know Orwell was in Southwold in the summer of 1930. Everyone in the town would have attended the local fair. Wandering on the periphery, this lonely figure. He's the right age, he's the right height. I think it's him. This is Southwold. Orwell's parents, Richard and Ida Blair, retired here in the early 1920s. Eric Blair was 18. He spent much of the next decade here, writing his early books, recovering from illness, on holiday from his teaching jobs. Local people who remember him do so with mixed feelings, as a strange-looking bohemian loner, sponging off his parents. And it cut both ways. Orwell's sister Avril claimed Eric hated Southwold.
One of those sleepy, old-fashioned streets that look so intensely peaceful on a casual visit, and so very different when you live in them and have an enemy or creditor in every window.
That was a still market town in Orwell's early novel, A Clergyman's Daughter. Looking over my shoulder at the high screen, it doesn't take too great a stretch of the imagination to connect them up. But, as so often with Orwell's life, it's difficult to separate between the self-created myth and the reality. For a man who professed to loathe Southwold, Orwell fell in love here and proposed marriage here, and he had his clothes cut by the Southwold tailor until the day that he died. And echoes of Southwold are everywhere in his work, symbol of the relationship that he had with Little England.
But that's another theme that is showing up, that he acts in such a way as if he seems to be loving the place. Same with his school, but then he publicly says, "No, I hated it." It's so contrarian.
Yeah, where's the truth? Like, is it something in the middle? Does he really hate the place, or did he love the place? Like what's like? To me, it's like I would want to know like the reason, like what's he getting out of it?
Yeah.
Like what's his motive, I guess.
Yeah. So is it the fact? Is it that he's just this is all an act? It's all a lie, or is it just that he's just such a complicated, contrarian person that it's hard really to make sense of what he's doing and why he's doing it?
I mean, I think it's the contrarian. That's where I lean.
Okay, yeah, I'm leaning that way as well. Let's keep on watching.
There is something distinctive and recognizable in English civilization. It is somehow bound up with solid breakfasts and gloomy Sundays, smoky towns and winding roads, green fields and red pillar boxes. It has a flavor of its own. However much you hate it or laugh at it, you will never be happy away from it for any length of time. The suet puddings and the red pillar boxes have entered into your soul.
It's a little bit of introverted sensation there.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing.
Right.
Also, I would say on the last video, again, it seems very un-EIE to me.
Yeah, it's a lot of awesomeness.
Yeah, like this, the way, I mean, the very end, obviously, but also the idea of like, I'm going to tell everyone I really like this place, but then go around, or act like I'm going to really like this place, but then go around and like tell everyone I hate it. I can see being like a bad stereotype of an EIE, but like from most I've interacted with, it's pretty important to, it seems pretty important to them to be very authentic about like their emotions and like how they're displaying it. So unless something like just major happened that we don't know about, I would find it weird that it'd be such a contrast by how he's acting he feels and what he's telling everyone else he feels.
Yes, I sort of get the feeling from it all that sometimes he really loves the place. At the same time, he feels like he shouldn't, so he wants to tell everyone that he doesn't. And it's that sort of, and that he'll change his mind in between and flip one way or the other and feel all confused, and then go and live under a bridge for a couple of months. And it seems very inconsistent, inconsistent. And,
I agree.
Yeah, but I think it's so difficult because it is so complicated. Just how he approaches it all. There's nothing simple about him.
No. I also wondered if it was even the opposite, like that he hated it the whole time, but kind of while he was there, he constantly almost put it off, like he was enjoying it, like almost. But I'm not sure.
Let's look at part 2 of George Orwell, The South Bank Show. Oh, okay. Let's take a look at this.
The essay question in my O-level English paper was, whose biography would you most like to write? There was never any doubt in my mind. Why Orwell? Because he matters in a way that 99 out of 100 writers do not. But is there anything new to say? I went looking for the Orwell who doesn't feature in the memoirs of the great and good. The man recalled by ordinary people who knew him long before he was a giant of 20th century political thought. People like Dora Georges, who grew up near Southwold in the 1920s.
One day I was walking past the gardens with a friend, and he appeared with this folded notepaper that she handed to me, and when I'd opened and read it, it was Ode to Dark Lady, and it's some emphasis on my Greek ancestry, I suppose, because I'd been born in Cyprus and my father was a Greek Cypriot.
So what did you do with this poem?
Well, I kept it for quite some years, actually, and then it seemed to disappear, and it wasn't until much later that I realised, who had written it, because Eric Blair was no connection with George Orwell, of course, in my mind, for quite a long time.
And what was Eric Blair like physically?
He suffered from a lot of colds, and wasn't terribly fit, I don't think. He was rather gauche in his speaking and spoke rather jerkily at times. And rather disconnected sentences. He didn't make a great impression on anybody. I think that's what I can say about it.
Disconnected sentences.
Orwell's footsteps are well trodden, but it's still possible to find something new. 3 years ago, I went to interview an old gentleman named George Summers, whose fiancée, Dorothy Rogers, used to walk home from work across this common in 1934. But Dorothy had a secret admirer who used to lie in wait for her each afternoon until the day that Summers arrived on his motorbike.
Yeah, that's already interesting. So disconnected sentences, that's already pointing more towards weak introverted logic, weak L. Definitely intuitive. Definitely intuitive.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way, to be honest.
Yeah. And not making much of an impression. So, as again, in person, he wasn't very good at leaving very much of an impression. And he didn't seem to be working on that much compared to how an IE usually tries to, with their extroverted sensation, F6, do try to leave more of an impression on people. He didn't.
Yeah, no, I don't see EIE being.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd consider other types before I would go to EIE. On the IEE though, would it be? And I generally don't know. Would it be typical for one to struggle to make an impression? Because
they can, because the thing, especially if it's in the moment, they can be sort of very likable and come across well to people, but they're not usually very good at having that sort of impact. With extrovert sensation role with F3, they are less likely to make that sort of instantaneous impact. And if they are sort of taking their extroverted ethics for granted, they aren't necessarily pushing that so much. I've met some male IEEs who just haven't really. They're not really focusing on leaving an impression. They just happen to be quite likable.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they never do anything which really puts people off. So I think it is passable. It's passable for an IEE, whereas it wouldn't be passable for some of the alternatives we had been considering.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I'm definitely off LSI.
No, I'm off LSI, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, let's persist.
George Orwell away.
I tried, I missed him. I went, I suppose, 50 yards, and there he was, and there she was. I was the guardian angel. I ran up the bank, I sort of pushed him off. I didn't kill him.
Orwell may have been remembered as shy, gauche, and painfully traditional in his attitudes to the opposite sex. But in his quiet way, he was something of a Southwold ladies' man. In the early 30s, he was deeply attracted to a woman named Eleanor Jakes. Their relationship only ended when she decided to marry his best friend, Dennis Collings.
I wonder if this is not an art in Paris and London.
Is that the one?
Oh,
Is that right?
with best wishes and so many thanks for bothering to buy this copy. Eric A. Blair, 12133.
What's the word? What is that word? Self-deprecating humor. That is very self-deprecating. He's making fun of himself.
What would you say that's indicating of?
Oh, well, it's something which I know it's a lot more with deltas than almost any other quadra. This self-deprecating humor. Not trying to, big yourself up or not trying to impress people. Almost the opposite, but as a result, coming across quite endearingly. And he has that shyness, but he's also a ladies' man, very interested in pursuing these relationships with these women. To be fair, I mean, many other types could do that as well. But
would you say saying he was very much a ladies' man implies he was successful?
I'm not sure.
Because to me, that would be kind of the question. That, like, is he just pursuing it, or is, like, he doing it well? If that makes sense.
It's a good question. I don't think he's going out to conquer the opposite sex or anything like that, which many a ladies' man may be considered to be doing. I give every impression he's taking these relationships quite seriously, but not quite having luck yet.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. For sure.
I've known IEEs and even EIIs to be in similar situations because they take relationships so seriously.
Yeah, no, it does seem kind of like an NF thing, to be honest. Not like exclusively, but like it's worth pointing out, I think.
Yes. Okay, let's persist.
My mother met him when they lived next door in the town, and because they had such strong political ideas, obviously got to know each other like that.
Yes.
He wanted my mother to go round the women's doss houses just as he'd been round the men's
to do some
doss
investigation.
Yes, but she did decline.
She did decline.
He came back and he said, I know what I'm going to call myself. I'm going to call myself George Orwell because it's a good round English name. And Eric Blair's such a thin name.
And he'd seen the river, as he presumably
I suppose
the River Orwell.
Yes,
which
so
goes through.
that was the reason why he did it.
When David was looking for material, what he was also looking for were pictures of Orwell, movies of Orwell, pictures of his family, and that sort of material. And what he did was actually find an awful lot of stuff that we didn't know existed.
Oh, that is extraordinary. This is pure gold here from Biographical.
Yes,
yes. Eric, Jeff, Self. Now, Self is your mother.
Yes.
Eric holding the dog again, and that's a family friend, isn't it? And
Yes.
that is completely, that's the first new photograph of Orwell I've seen in, I suppose, over a decade. Why do you think it was that your mother married your father rather than Eric at that time?
Well, what she said was, I think I was only about 10 at the time, he was either too cynical or too sardonic, and I think, because I didn't know what the word meant, I think it must have been cynical.
Orwell Orwell's last visit to Southwold was in the summer of 1939 to attend his father's deathbed. As was the custom, the corpse had a copper penny placed on each eyelid. Only Orwell could have found a moral dilemma in what to do with the coin. In the end, he walked down to the beach and threw the pennies in the sea.
Yeah, that's so Delta, Delta
By the
humanitarian.
mid-1930s, Orwell had said goodbye to Southwold. He decanted work in a bookshop and infiltrate London literary life. Gordon Comstock, the hero of his next novel, Keep the Aspidistra Flying, is a friendless, moth-eaten poet. As ever in his work, Orwell was fashioning romantic...
Because the thing is, that sort of thing, there's no ideological justification I could identify for doing that.
For the pennies?
Yes. It seems a whole lot more complicated than just ideology.
Yeah. It almost seems like just acting on a feeling. Like,
yeah, like he feels sort of, he feels very complicated about this idea of placing the pennies on his father's eyes, and he just felt uncomfortable about it. Maybe I'm not sure what's going on in his head at that point. I have no idea, but it doesn't seem straightforward to always find moral complication in so much of what he does.
Yeah. No, I agree for sure.
And that his own class identification does come from a very personal place. It's not just these people bad, those people good, or or some way of clarifying the strata of society. It's more, I feel bad for what I've gone through, and everything which appears to be ideological seems to be a projection of his own feeling of guilt.
Yeah, and I think he comes across as somebody who felt very guilty about like where he came from, and is almost trying to make up for that. I mean, I think back to like the idea of like he's a failure, which to me, like, I don't know if maybe I just missed it, but it wasn't clear to me whether we can really say whether he thought that at the time, or if this is like in hindsight, like, oh, looking back, I was just a failure. But I think either way, to me, that wasn't like literal. And I think they kind of suggested this in the video. It wasn't like a literal, I failed externally, because obviously he wasn't a failure. I mean, he could be lying, but I don't think he was. I think he was thinking like from a moral almost place. That with like looking back at his years and thinking I'm guilty, is basically.
Yeah. Interesting.
Romantic versions of himself that he could project onto the printed page.
It was a stupid thing that he had done. Fancy sending a poem to a paper like the Primrose, as though they'd accept poems from people like him. The mere fact that the poem wasn't typed would tell them what kind of person he was. He might as well have dropped a card on Buckingham Palace.
I went to what is now called the Prompt Corner in Hampstead. That was then a bookshop, which was run by a grey, tall, gaunt-looking man. I wanted this Woodhouse book, and he tried to palm me off with a book he'd obviously been anxious to get rid of, called Trader Horn in Madagascar, which was not at all what I wanted. So after a slight dissension, I got away with the slightly grimy copy of the Woodhouse, so it was sold as new. But that, in fact, I realized many years later, would have been Orwell.
One of the advantages of coming to Orwell on his centenary is that, though so many of his friends have unfortunately died, a great deal of archive material that wasn't previously available is now to hand. Here are all the original letters that Victor Gollancz wrote to Orwell's agent, Leonard Moore, in the early 1930s. They're full of interesting biographical fragments. And here's a letter from the 22nd of July, 1932. My dear Moore, Eric Blair, I'm now able to make an offer for the manuscript in its present form. This was the manuscript of Down and Out in Paris and London. And it's interesting that Orwell was already thinking of changing his name from Eric Blair, because Gollantz's second point is, I do not in the least mind under what name it is published. Interesting from the biographer's point of view is a little note at the end of this letter from Orwell's agent, which says, if I could hear from you by tomorrow, Friday, I should be glad, as Blair is going abroad. And this is the end of July 1932. I know nothing about Blair going abroad at the end of July 1932. There is no note or record of it anywhere else in his writings or letters. Where was he going? Was it his agent's ruse to try and get a quick reply from the publisher? I don't think we shall ever know.
I think that's another thing, that this instability is contrarianism, but also how erratic his life patterns were. Where is he at any particular point in time? It's hard for them to pinpoint.
Oh yeah, like when they were like trying to find him in one of the other videos, he was like, I think that kid is him. It's like, maybe. But it seems, but my point being, there's a desperation there. Like, he didn't, it wasn't easy, like, to find him, which again, I can't see EIE.
Yes, oh no, I'm pretty much off EIE. What I'm considering now is the possibility of EII, but he just seems so erratic. It's like, yes, there's a certain, what's the word? Conscientiousness. There's a certain self-critical aspect of him, and the ability to find moral conundrums. One could identify with an EII, but how he enacts that is so erratic that I think IEE is probably on balance the best contender.
Yeah, I think those two are the best. Unless I'm forgetting something, I think those are the two best types so far.
Yes.
And like we already said, the EIE doesn't. I don't think EIE fits. And then EII, I think it's the same thing. I mean, different reasons, obviously, but it just doesn't fit.
Nah, it doesn't explain the erraticness. It also doesn't explain his ability in extroverted ethics, in terms of how he's able to coin the right words to stick in the imagination. Maybe I agree. There are great writers, like Dostoevsky is a great writer, but people don't tend to, quote Dostoevsky. They don't tend to quote J.K. Rowling in terms of certain phrases, certain aspects of imagery. Or even though at least for Dostoevsky, it's a great novel. Some of his works are some of the greatest novels ever written. So
it's just a different style.
Yes, it's a different style. It is a different style, very much so. It's not popular. Whereas I think Orwell had a grasp of the popular in his writing.
I think I would also say that was probably intentional. Because to me, I almost wonder if this fits being an energizer. I'm not sure, but like, he wanted his writing to stir you into action. And I think a lot of the way he wrote about certain things, like with 1984, the way it's written, I mean, it's sad, but it's intentionally, or it's tragic, it might be a better word, but it's intentionally tragic because the point is that it's on us.
Yeah.
Like, that's the point he's kind of driving at. And so I do think that he's pushing for action. He doesn't want you to just read the book and then just kind of move on. He's always pushing for something to happen afterwards. Of course, you could ask whether he's successful at that. I think he probably was, but I guess that's subjective.
Certainly sticks in the imagination, the idea of the future fascist state. And people do, I think certainly his book served as a very strong warning about what a Western society could turn itself into if it succumbs to fascism.
I will say someone similar, because I kind of, since I just mentioned that I don't know, but that might be being an energizer. I believe Ray Bradbury, who I think was probably an IEI. I don't know if you read Fahrenheit 451, but like it kind of feels. I think he had a similar approach to where it kind of the book, spoilers, I guess, book ends on a not as tragic as Orwell's, but there's not really a conclusion. It kind of leaves it open to like, and it kind of leads you to a call of action of, hey, I think this could happen. I think it's gonna be bad. Stop it, basically, and it's kind of pushing that.
Yeah, so that does show some more extroverted ethics. There is a savviness there in emotions.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Let's look at some of the comments. Vlad says seems R2. Yeah, the quantity of different relationships could point more to R2. I think I lean there as well, more so than R1. So let's fixate on any particular individual so much, but there are.
In 1936, Orwell's life changed. Victor Gallant, his publisher, suggested that he should investigate conditions in the blighted, depression-hit North. Orwell's journey, which resulted in the book The Road to Wigan Pier, had a galvanizing effect on his consciousness. It produced some of his most dazzling pieces of reportage.
She looked up as the train passed, and I was almost near enough to catch her eye. She had a round, pale face, the usual exhausted face of the slum girl who is 25 and looks 40, and it wore, for the second in which I saw it, the most desolate, hopeless expression I have ever seen. We are mistaken when we say that it isn't the same for them as it would be for us, and that people bred in the slums can imagine nothing but the slums. She understood, as well as I did, how dreadful a destiny it was to be in the bitter cold, on the slimy stones of a slum backyard, poking a stick up a foul drain pipe.
Orwell was keen to explore the reality of working-class life, in particular that of the miners. Joe Kennan accompanied Orwell on his first trip to the coalface and recorded his experience in this 1971 interview. Kennan was only 5 feet tall, while Orwell stood well over 6 foot.
The weight of the roof had bent a number of girders, and we hadn't gone more than 300 yards when, and Orwell just didn't duck his head quick enough. Hit him, knocked the helmet off, knocked him down. He was flat out. The working face was, I think, 26 inches. And by the time we landed there, Orwell was unquestionably, he was exhausted. And I said to him, it's a so-and-so good job. They don't know what you're down here for to write a book about mining. And should be a parlour from Belgium.
Joe Kennan needn't have worried. Orwell's book paid due respect to the work of the miners.
It is only because miners sweat their guts out that superior persons can remain superior. You and I, and the editor of the Times Literary Supplement, and the Nancy poets, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, all of us owe the comparative decency of our lives to poor drudges on the ground, blackened to the eyes with their throats full of coal dust, driving their shovels forward with arms and belly muscles of steel.
Some previous biographers of Orwell have stressed the importance of his trip north as the defining moment in his conversion to socialism. But looking at his diaries, I'm not sure it was so immediate. This is an entry from February 1936. Mr. Mead sent me across to Wigan to see Joe Kennan, an electrician who takes a prominent part in the socialist movement. Now, he might as well be talking about the temperance movement, called with it. At this stage, Orwell simply hadn't fully identified himself with the left. It wasn't so much the deprivations of England that converted Orwell to socialism. It was the horrors of Spain.
Another thing is this tendency to sort of foolhardily put himself in situations that are a bit too much for him.
Yeah, no, for sure. He does kind of tend to jump into situations and act almost surprised when they don't come out the way he expected them to be. I don't know.
Yeah, living out as a tramp, going off into the mines, bumping his head, getting absolutely exhausted, wearing himself out. It does, again, lend itself more towards one-dimensional senses.
Yeah, no, not a censor.
Yeah, not a sensor, and also one-dimensional senses at that. So not, again, that it goes against S6, but it's more S5.
Yeah, no, I agree.
In the last days of 1936, Orwell set out for Barcelona to enlist as a volunteer in the Spanish Civil War. Orwell had attached himself to the Trotskyist POUM on the Aragon front, narrowly missing death when a sniper's bullet winged through his throat. Later, in Barcelona, he was an eyewitness to the communist-inspired suppression of the militias, and only just escaped with his life.
Goodness. I was just talking about foolhardily putting himself in danger. Okay.
Yeah, no.
That's good. Oh.
Despite the vicious infighting on the Republican side, the war brought Orwell into daily contact with men who not only held left-wing views, this above all else that converted him to the socialist cause. The war lost, he wrote this poem to commemorate the Italian soldier who'd shaken his hand on the day he joined the militia.
Before your bones were dry, and the lie that slew you is buried under a deeper lie. But the thing that I saw in your face, no power can disinherit. No bomb that ever burst, shattered.
And well, that's interesting. So in his conversion to socialism, it was from having met and fought alongside people who were avowed socialists.
Yeah, that seems valued R to me. Maybe even R2. I'm not sure if I could say that from that or not, but I would say that seems more valued R to me.
Find what superficially we see.
Sorry, what was that? You there? Oh, hey.
Hi, sorry about that. It happened in my interview with Andre. The internet went off.
Oh, okay.
I'm back again. I had to disconnect and reconnect. Let me go back to sharing the screen. Hang on. Okay, so where were we on that? What? How far were you when suddenly it went off?
I had said something about it being him saying R valuing.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I'll look through this in the comments. Okay, not EIE, spend time recovering from illness. Yep.
Hi, Micah. Sorry about that.
You're fine. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Where were we when I cut off?
So, I had just said that about him seeming very R valuing, and I said it was possible that it was R2, but I couldn't tell, like just on the clip we had just seen. And you had started saying something but from the very beginning, your screen had kind of freezed, at least on my end. I don't know if everyone else could hear you. So I don't really know what you're saying.
Okay, so I need to wind back a bit. I got an interesting bit about Jewish people. Did you see anything about Jewish people?
I have not seen anything about Jewish people yet.
Okay, fine. In which case, I'm going to rewind back a bit, see if we can get there. Okay.
Before leaving for Spain, Orwell had met and married Eileen O'Shaughnessy. Back in England with Eileen, laid low by the first signs of tuberculosis, he was an increasingly disillusioned man, struggling to make sense of his time. 60 years on, some of his opinions seem highly questionable.
I never, in the short time I knew Orwell, ever managed to get him to say anything very derogatory about Adolf Hitler. And then, I think it was in 1942, I was electrified to read Orwell's review of a new edition of Mein Kampf, which he begins with, I wish to put it on record that I have never felt any dislike of Adolf Hitler. And then he goes on to compare his face with that of a socialist. Well, this seemed to me quite extraordinary. And still does.
What I do feel is that any Jew, European Jew, would prefer Hitler's kind of social system to ours if it were not that he happens to persecute them. They make use of England as a sanctuary, but they cannot help feeling the profoundest contempt for it. You can see this in their eyes, even when they don't say it outright.
Say that's anti-Semitism. Well, a Jew may feel that. I'm not speaking about that. But at that time, casually, so much anti-Jewish, but careless about the way they spoke of Jews.
Orwell knows that he is running the risk of being anti-Semitic. But if you're going to be interested in prejudice, as Orwell is, there's a risk that you have to take. And I think Orwell really wants to press the question, why? Orwell is arguing as a writer for the freedom to talk about.
And yet Orwell's attitude to Jewishness is not at all straightforward. He had countless Jewish friends. Both his publishers were Jewish. So were many of his literary acquaintances. And so was a 19-year-old boy with whom he served in the St. John's Wood platoon of the Home Guard in 1940. I mean, you came across him obviously off duty and the times when you...
Yeah. Oh, so the pitch has got a bit funny there.
Yeah.
Goodness. Yeah, Micah, that's interesting, isn't it?
No, it's very interesting. Huh. I didn't know that. I don't know.
Oh, dang. This is really irritating. Right. Yeah, so that was very interesting about, his comments about Jews fleeing persecution. But it's also the sort of thing which humanitarians, whereby they speculate on someone's intentions, often without good license to do so.
What types would you say do that? So I don't think I heard you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can. I didn't hear. It sounded like you said a certain type or maybe a certain quadra, might like kind of question, like one, or explore. I don't know, some like people's intentions and stuff. But I didn't hear which type it was, or which value.
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Can you see me?
Yeah. So, yeah, I can see you fine. Basically, with Delta humanitarians, there can be a tendency for them to speculate on people's intentions and motivations without good license to do so.
Okay, yeah. Would you say
The
that's
idea we
because?
can see it in their eyes.
Yeah, would you say that's because of valued R plus valued extroverted intuition?
Yeah, it's the idea that he's not necessarily. No, with Delta, it's not that they're necessarily making an absolute statement. It's that they are speculating on it, but it can easily be perceived as being an absolute statement, and being more willing to go and speculate on things when it may not be wise to do so.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I hadn't thought about it, but I think I agree with you.
So if you're speculating, people take you as making an absolute statement. It can sound awful. Not sure what he meant by the Hitler comment. To be fair, was this before or after he really started the persecution? I'm not sure, because I think it was complicated back then in terms of attitudes towards Hitler, because people didn't know the magnitude of what he did until later.
Well, I think that was fairly common, to be honest, back then.
Yeah.
And before like the real horrors. I mean, I guess it depends. Depends on when he wrote it, but it was. I don't know. I think as a society, we almost had a blind eye to Hitler, to some of the worst things about him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like we were kind of forced to face it that, I don't know. I think a lot of people would have maybe even agreed with him.
Yeah. No, I think that was certainly some of that sentiment. It was only later people realised, oh goodness. Let's carry on watching.
You weren't actually going about your jobs in the Home Guard. What did you surmise about Orwell's attitude to the Jews and Jewish people, and what was then known as the Jewish question?
I used to tell him my views, which was the same as any views I think as regards the Germans, the same as like any Englishman's views. Mine were possibly a little stronger because I was Jewish. And although they hadn't started gassing the Jews in 1940, there was certainly a lot of problems over in Europe. But I felt Orwell was sympathetic in his views. After the war, when I read his 7 books, I was quite amazed at some of the references that he did make to Jews. Although I think when one looks at how novelists wrote in the pre-war days, certainly going back to Victorian times, this was probably part of the course.
Final stretch in this.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You've got to consider the time in which he wrote. It is important.
Oh no, for sure. I think you can't take him out of that time period.
Yeah, like look at what Dickens wrote about Jews. Goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's only fair, for sure.
And it is keep working in mind that Orwell did associate very closely with Jewish people and was friends with many Jewish people, which suggests certainly, at least on the personal level, he didn't have this sort of prejudice. But there was a general speculation that certainly would, at least today, be beyond the pale.
Yeah, no, I agree.
This, in 1984, is London.
You're still there? Yeah.
This is really irritating. I'm sorry about this, Micah.
Oh, you're fine. Bad internet is it's horrible.
Oh dear. I need to. Problem is, I can't do. There's nowhere downstairs. Like time of day, it's not going to work. Actually, maybe it could be work. Could work soon. Actually, people may have gone to bed. Maybe I should relocate.
You think that would work better?
Yeah, I'll relocate because it's annoying for us. It's annoying for the audience. So I'm going to relocate now because it is midnight. And if it's midnight, that means that no one's going to be in some of the rooms. Hang on. Let me just move. I just hope I don't fall over and break my neck. Oop, not that room. Okay, let's try this room. Right. Okay, I'm back. Let's see if this will be okay now. I'm far nearer to the router.
Senate House in Bloomsbury became the Ministry of Truth.
Actually, I need to go. Let's wind back just so you. Okay, does it look familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
In between air raids, Orwell walked the streets of London, building a new and frightening metropolis in his mind. Senate House in Bloomsbury became the Ministry of Truth. And Trafalgar Square became Victory Square. Big Brother's statue would have replaced Nelson's column. And St. Martin in the Fields was converted into a gory waxwork museum of military history. Declared unfit for military duty, Orwell spent 2 years at the BBC's Eastern Service in Portland Place, the dreary corridors of the Ministry of Truth, where Winston Smith sits airbrushing people and events out of history, certainly owe something to the BBC offices where he worked as a talks producer.
Routine correction to times of 17th March 1984 were shown, quote, in his broadcast speech last night, Big Brother referred in confident terms to the probability of a large-scale Eurasian offensive early next month. There is no possible doubt, he said. It will be launched in South India. Other parts are expected to remain quiet. Reprint entire back number and file.
What he saw about here in his picture of the Ministry of Truth was something which became a reality in the Soviet Union, in which it really was the case that people could be airbrushed from history.
Mm.
He certainly didn't write it as a warning against socialism. He wrote to journals in America saying this is not against the Labour Party, which was then in power, and he was very anxious that that shouldn't be taught.
After what he described as 2 wasted years at the BBC, Orwell moved on to the more congenial job of literary editor of the left-wing weekly Tribune. Even at this late stage of his life, Orwell remains an elusive presence for the biographer, and the worry is that a vital clue to his character may have been overlooked. Is that one of his razor blades?
I know.
Razor blade
A
dryer.
razor blade dryer. I just cut this. Wouldn't normally keep something like that. But
Well, the thing about Orwell, one of the things I discovered how few things there are is remaining. There's hardly anything. I mean, we know the books that he read.
Yes,
But the idea of having his... Somebody sent me through the post his stapler from Tribune, which they bought. But then it turns out, I think there are several Orwell Tribune staplers, so nobody knows which is which. So, and presumably there are sort of postcards and things sent to him.
well, this is what one of the most poignant parts of the collection, I think, is the Christmas
Richard.
cards that were sent to him.
Merry Christmas, Daddy. His personal life, too, was changing. Unable to have children themselves, he and Eileen decided to adopt a baby boy.
Interesting.
Richard Horatio Blair. A lot of them I'd not seen. The ones of you, for example, as a child, playing on the...
Oh, yeah,
playing
well, there are
the
lots and lots of,
carpet,
lots of photographs, which
Those are
he sent me many years ago.
And there's that marvellous, and to me, almost symbolic one, which is him pushing you with it, kind of pushing the push end towards you, and running the school children.
Yes, because the actual photograph itself is simply him, me, and in the pushchair, which has been cropped, obviously, simply for.
But the wider photograph has got the school.
Yes, that's right. It has. That's right. But they were cropped out.
It's a wonderfully evocative. I mean, it says quite a lot about immediately post-war London.
It doesn't. Everything was worn out and grey, and which is what he said. Oh, London's getting terribly grey. That's why he moved up to Scotland, which was.
I mean, did he not encourage you to smoke a cigarette?
Yes, he did, rather.
What happened then?
Well, he used to throw cigarette ends into the fireplace. I would go down after lunch, take the cigarettes out of the fireplace and stuff them into his pipe, and then ask for a lighter. And the lighter would be handed down. And the conversation would carry on. No one didn't break whatever we were talking about. Now it's time to light this down. Take quickly get it going. They did get it going eventually. That put me in bed for about several hours actually afterwards.
You have this place in Scotland.
So also moving away from London because it's getting grey and dreary and unpleasant. Again, a more introvert sensation bent there.
Yeah, no. I think I would agree. I really like London, but
yeah, it's good now, but they sort of made it nicer after the war.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't. Yeah, the war too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. How much longer is there? There's not too much long.
He wanted this place in Scotland was for his little boy. He'd adopted a little boy, and he was quite sure there was going to be an atomic war, and he thought Scotland, right in the north of Scotland, would be much safer than being down in London.
In 1945, with the war over, Orwell's life was in crisis. Animal Farm had been a huge international bestseller, but his wife Eileen had tragically died during a routine operation. Orwell's instinct was to retreat, and he came here, to the Hebridean island of Jura. Orwell relished Jura's remoteness, but many of his friends, sent details of the 48-hour trip from London, cried off on grounds of inaccessibility. London to Glasgow, Glasgow to Gourock by train, boat to Tarbert, bus to West Tarbert, another boat to Craighouse, followed by a 17-mile taxi trip, after which, depending on the state of the road, the visitor might well have to get out and walk. But why did he come here, hundreds of miles from London literary life? One of his friends felt that Orwell could only thrive in adverse conditions. Well, he certainly found them on Jura.
Okay, last video here.
I've always been suspicious of the idea of writerly presences that mysteriously hang around in the ether long after the writer has disappeared. But here on Jura, Orwell's scent is very strong. This is the room in which he wrote his final novel. Finishing it, chain-smoking as he sat hunched over a paraffin heater, nearly killed him. The working title was The Last Man in Europe.
Sensation.
It was published 6 months later.
He has to be S5. Has to be.
I think I agree with you on that.
It's a wonderful view.
Like looking through a window pane.
I'm sorry?
It's a quotation from my own work. The last refuge of a desperate middle-aged writer.
There are no photographs of Orwell's life on Jura, but this film, starring Ronald Pickup, explored his time on the island and was shot on location at Barn Hill. Although Alan Plater's script sticks closely to the known facts, it's still difficult to separate the Orwell myth from the reality. This is the Corrie Brecon, the channel that flows around the northern coast of Jura. At certain times, the tides make it highly dangerous to shipping. Orwell came this way in the summer of 1947, returning from a camping expedition round the coast with his nephew, his niece, and his 3-year-old adopted son, Richard. They were shipwrecked, and halfway through the writing in 1984, its author nearly drowned. According to the Orwell legend, the boat was caught up in a giant whirlpool, but the location of the island from which he was rescued suggests a slightly different story.
Orwell was coming up the west coast, and as they came through the gap between the large island and the small rock, which is the Bougie Rock, they had a notion to collect puffins.
That's a nice hat.
And they turned the
My fiance wouldn't let me wear a hat like that.
Which, to my way of thinking, hadn't been secured properly. So when she was turned sharply into the island, the outboard came off.
Mike Richardson has lived and worked on Jura for over 25 years, and as a sailor, he has his own particular view of the incident.
The person who was holding the painter had to leave go to help the survivors get onto the shore, and not while doing so, the dinghy went, and they were stranded on the island for a number of hours till they were picked up by a lobster boat. And
that's interesting, because the man helping them onto the rock was Henry Dakin, Orwell's nephew, who's left the only written account really of what happened. And his account suggests to me that they were actually in the whirlpool itself before coming out and ending up on the island, which doesn't square with the geographical reality as you just described it. It seems to be another one of those grey areas in Orwell's life. We know something happened. We know there was an accident here, that he was washed up and rescued by a lobster boat. But the actual reality of it seems to be beyond us now.
It's incredible that he lived so long.
Yeah, he's lucky. He's pretty lucky.
He was very self-destructive. He'd messed up his motorbike. The van was out of order.
He always tried to give the impression of himself as a practical man, couldn't he? He would mend things and put out shells, but you.
Oh, here we go. Here's the P6. Right at the end, we get the P6. Very good. Okay, I'm going to continue.
You give me the impression he was rather cack-handed.
Well, he was destroyed. Everything that connected him with the mainland, you might say. It was very, very strange atmosphere.
David Holbrook is one of the few people to have encountered Orwell on Jura. As a 23-year-old, he went up to visit his girlfriend, Susan Watson, Barnhill's housekeeper. When you were actually staying on Jura was the time he was begun to write, the early draft of 1984. And am I right in thinking you actually saw that manuscript?
Yes, I went up to his study one day. I think he was out. And there was this battered old typewriter with the thing about Winston,
What do you think about 1984 as a novel now? 15, maybe 60 years after you saw it on the typewriter in Jura?
Well, it seems to me paranoid, I suppose some of it's come to pass.
The irony is that although it wasn't a prophecy, it's full of prophetic statements. Deforestation, the treatment of dissidents in mental hospitals, the breakdown of the nuclear family, the distribution of habit-forming drugs, the degeneration of language, and perhaps especially the waging of wars on the fringes of the big empires. The one I like most, really, has only come true quite recently. He forecast there would be a lottery, a national lottery, which for the proles would be their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulus.
1984 contains some brilliant insights, in particular his concept of newspeak, the reshaping of the language so as to make truth inexpressible. All that is going on all the time. And he summed that up brilliantly.
Well, no, for one example, just take the word good. If you have that, what need for the word bad? Ungood does just as well. Then instead of a string of vague extra words like excellent, splendid, you have plus good, or stronger still, double plus good. In newspeak, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by 6 words. In reality, by only 1 word. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston?
Winston, like Orwell himself, is a very nostalgic figure. Winston is still hanging on for an old world of, as it were, traditional values of integrity, honesty, straightforwardness, character. And actually, Big Brother is saying
ethics,
there is no
logic.
such thing. These really are wishful thinking.
I agree.
Crime stop.
And also representing some loss of that in the reduction of the possibilities of language to very sort of hard, soulless rules of structure. Good, double, plus good. It's like the worst of introverted logic, the worst of L, at the expense of I.
No, I think I agree with you. I think I read recently that he as he had evolved as a writer, he had wanted to be very specific about everything, about like everything he was writing and stuff, which I guess could be seen as a way of like wanting there to be a very specific word for everything. So like, which would be the very opposite of saying something like good and ungood. Because ungood, what does that even mean? What does it say? It doesn't really say anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think I agree. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think in 1984 in general, it's his, his portrayal of the negative LSI, the malignant LSI. I think that's what 1984 has a lot of.
Especially, I think, like if it's inspired by the Soviet Union, like I know, like I've seen, I haven't typed it myself, but I know that Stalin is commonly typed, I think, as LSI.
Yes, I would say though that 1984 was meant to be the warning against fascism rather than the warning against communism. It was Animal Farm, which was the warning against communism.
I agree 100%, but I think he would have looked at the Soviet Union and said it was fascist.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I would not be surprised at that. I would not be surprised. So they had the features in common. Let's continue.
Whether it's a prophecy or a warning about the loss of decency, I think one of the keys to 1984 lies in Orwell's own deep-rooted paranoia. Throughout his life, he took a lively interest in them, malign exterior forces with the capacity to eavesdrop on the doings of ordinary people. Even on Jura, he was convinced that his mail was being opened and that visitors were communist spies.
Oh, goodness.
The world of 1984, where telescreens keep the downtrodden inhabitants under constant surveillance, and history changes whenever those in power find it embarrassing, is the world of Orwell's worst nightmares. A world in which authority can open a window into your soul, especially in room 101.
What is in room 101? It's the thing that you most fear, most hate. It can be death by drowning, death by fire, death by impalement. I think it's a marvelous one. Death, well, I don't think it's marvelous, but death by impalement. But he said, or it could be quite a trivial thing.
Rats, murmured Winston. In this room. They're all over the place, said Julia indifferently as she lay down again. Some parts of London are swarming with them. Did you know they attack children? In some of these streets, a woman daren't leave a baby alone for 2 minutes. It's the great, huge brown ones that do it. And the nasty thing is that the brutes always... Don't go on, said Winston. There are horrors in the world. A rat.
Orwell, it's fair to say, was obsessed by rats. An unappeasable, furry brood runs through his work. A letter to a teenage friend gives precise instructions on how to hunt and kill them. You're in Spain described as trying to evade bullets in the way that a rat crawls under a door. In 1984, this obsession culminates in Winston's encounter with Room 101.
As you will see, this is marked. It fits over the head, leaving no exit. When the plastic door is raised up, the rat will shoot out like bullets. Julia! Please! Julia! I don't care what you do to her! Julia! Julia, not me! Not me!
1984 was finished by the end of 1948. Orwell lasted another year, first in a sanatorium in Gloucestershire, and then here, in University College Hospital, London. He died of a lung hemorrhage in January 1950. 3 months before he died, he married Sonia Brownell, with whom 7 years younger than him, who spent the rest of her life in a secret quest to burnish up his reputation and memory. And perhaps at the very end, his mind moved back through the cloud of the years, to older and even older memories, to the rain falling over the grey sea off Jura, to the thump of the bombs going off in the streets beyond Piccadilly, the lofted torches in the great square at Barcelona, the electric shock of the bullet slamming home, his mother's shadow, and the sound of the nightjar on summer evenings in the lanes, and the woods and the streams of Oxfordshire.
Okay, so that is the end of the documentary, and I would say well, what do you think, Micah? What is your conclusion?
You're making me go first. Oh, so I would say the two best types would be, we kind of already mentioned it near the end, but I'd say IEE or IEI. And out of those two, I probably lean IE, honestly, because there's so much. I mean, there's just certain things like just some of the erratic behavior. I could see T Polar, introverted thinking Polar with like how, like with like some of his writing, and his approaches to like what he was against. Seems very R valuing, in almost everything. And also like in some of the more impulsive behavior, like one I could see EP, like EXP, but as a temperament, but also I could see ignoring introverted intuition, as in, because he didn't. It's weird because you read 1984 and you think introverted intuition. I think the natural conclusion is pretty strong, which I think is right. But at the same time, you look at like his life, and it's like I get the impression he jumps into things without just adapts to that, and sometimes gets very lucky, and on his survival and stuff, and that seems to me more unvalued as even ignoring introverted intuition. And then like I think there's a bunch of reasons why II doesn't fit. A small one, which I guess it's a little stereotypical, but I think an IE would be IEE would be more likely to be called cynical than an EII. This is my experience, but then there's also like they kind of like living as like as a tramp, and there's all those things that don't really seem introverted symptoms. S6. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think looking at the overall picture of him, we see a guy who is very much focused in finding out the other perspective to that which he had been raised in. He's a journalist. He goes and he finds out what other people's views are, specifically the working classes view, what it's like to live as a down and out in Paris and London, and tries to really put himself into the shoes of someone completely different from himself. At the same time, addled by the guilt and self-resentment of having been given this sort of life on the plate, not of his own creation, not of his own merit. He just inherited it all. He wanted to reject that. He wanted to sort of live his life free from those structures, from those things which are nothing to do with his own merit and his own character. And I think through those explorations, something's quite erratic, can be a bit paranoid at times, can often go in his explorations, end up in danger or tiring out his body, so weak senses. Through through those explorations and adventures, ending up fighting with the Trotskyists in Spain, and through his personal connections with them, his personal relationships are actually identifying with socialism, but never truly being a dyed-in-the-wool one of a club, but ending up criticizing the excesses on his side of the argument, and they've always remaining contrarian even to the last, regardless of whether he was contrarian against his own upbringing or contrarian against the way of life which he then chose. So, and throughout, disconnected thoughts, a lack of L, you could say, in general, I think a rejection of L.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, and his overall leaning seemed to be about what he felt was most compassionate, what he felt was best understanding another person's point of view from a very different life from your own, and from his own, and informed by his personal relationships with people fighting in Spain. He thought he just identified the whole thing, and in doing so, overcoming his own guilt for his own life handed to him on a platter, which he tried to resist so much. It's a far more deeply personal, I'd say, than structural. And in 1984, yes, certainly some foresight there, some T, but for within that, creating the hell for an IEE, his very worst nightmares and paranoia made real in this book, and seeing how one's individuality could be crushed into just a cog in the wheel, and how going ever deeper to the inner soul of the person, how that can be examined and rendered to be moot through applying the right level of pressure and repetition of slogans and structure. It seems to be very much the idea of what would happen if an IEE were placed totally under the thumb of the most evil example of an LSI one could imagine.
Yeah, I think Big Brother, whether you're thinking of the person who may or may not exist, or the concept, which is really what matters in the first place, could almost be typed as an LSI that's gone horribly wrong. I agree with that.
I feel it's very much an IEE's understanding of an LSI. And perspective. Definitely a cross-quadral fear, as it were, that phobia realized in the book. And yes, there was premonition, but I'm not sure that necessarily was the point. Maybe in his maybe a warning of a potential future. And yes, other bits which came through in the book, how he was also, he used to insist on being a practical man, but he was also cack-handed and things used to go wrong when he tried.
Oh yeah,
and I thought that seems to be very much P6. We see the S5 throughout. The R both in his identity with his soul, but also his pursuit of love. And it was more creative, more flexible. It wasn't set on a particular one individual. And also, as we see, even in his times when he did things which were seemingly beyond the pale today, like his talk of Jewish people and what he could see in their eyes and their inner motivations or intentions. It was a sort of speculation one can imagine, a speculation on their intentions, which could be taken to be very much an anti-Semitic comment, if written in more absolutist terms. Regardless today, it would be looked down upon. Certainly, it would have ended anyone's reputation. Back then, very different story. And
yeah, no, I agree with what you said before about it being very valued R. They just, I would even go, I don't know, I do think that would fit creative R more than R1. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like, because it's creative R, there's like a certain amount of there's like a certain amount of flexibility there of like, maybe not. That
yes, the speculation takes the forefront. There is certainly that, but also we do see E. But the interesting thing is this: there was more sign of E when he was younger, and in later life, as they're talking about P.
Yeah.
P right at the end, and we talked a lot about E at the beginning of a video.
Yeah, no, you're right.
To appear a certain way, but it wasn't. And this is the thing. The reason why we may have floated the possibility of EIE to begin with, but later thinking, no, it doesn't make any sense. You see his development, and you see his growth from the demonstrative function to the mobilizing function. And I think that is perhaps the strongest argument one can make in favor of IEE, certainly over IEI.
No, yeah, for sure. I think with like extroverted ethics, where, yeah, and I think that's basically what you're just saying, but it's like, it seems like it was more natural for him, but also, even at its most natural, it seems very unvalued to me. Like, even when it's most clear, it also seems to be clear to me that he prefers R, or introverted ethics. And then where later on, especially later on in his life, maybe we could see it younger, earlier on, but I think it's harder to see. You can see a value for P, but it's never quite as strong. It's like the opposite of what we see with extroverted ethics, where it's
still
strong but not valued.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's a weak thing, but it is something which he's asserting and trying more. And before, he was using a lot more E and sort of taking it for granted. Yeah, no, I think his development fits IEE, certainly. That transition over time, the chronology seems to fit. For some reason, I'm not getting any more comments. Is that because people aren't posting comments, or is it because something's not working on my end? I wonder.
I haven't gotten a comment in about an hour or more.
Same. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check to see if there is anything else just on YouTube, and if not, I think we can finish the live stream, because I think we both have agreement on here.
Yeah, no, I think we agree.
Yeah,
for sure.
Live stream. Right, let's take a look. What people say. Yeah, no one else has commented. Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think IEE.
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, so I think IEE, and that's it. Everyone who's still watching, thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely day, and thank you so much, Micah, for sitting in and offering your thoughts.
I'm glad to be here.
Take care now. Bye-bye.